Does anybody remember this? The good old PlayStation Move. Anybody remember the fanboy videos I made on the old account back in 2010? Yeah, I didn't mean what I said in those videos. I just said those things because I knew they'd get views, and surprise, surprise, they did. I also hinted around that time that I'd review the Move at some point. Hey, I said some point. Better late than never, right? Even though it's almost 8 years later. But you know what? I'll make it up to you. I'll review the Kinect, too. How about that? Come on, if I review one of them, I gotta review the other. We gotta find out which is better, after all. So let's start with the Move. To this day, I still don't know what Sony was trying to accomplish with this thing. I don't recall them ever giving a straight answer, and their weird and confusing commercials certainly didn't help. My best guess is that they were trying to tap into the Wii market, but beyond the commercials I saw in 2010 and the initial positive reviews the Move got when it first launched, it completely dropped off the radar until early 2013, when at the PS4 reveal conference, some guy made an offhand comment saying the PS4 would support it, and now they're trying to make it work with the VR headset or something. The occasional game would launch here and there with Move support, but it was never really advertised, so it looks like Sony dropped the ball with this thing and never bothered picking it back up. But anyways, how is the Move? It's not very good. The first and biggest problem is the design of the controller. The overall shape of this thing is really awkward. I couldn't find a way to comfortably hold it and still be able to easily press the buttons. If I held it comfortably, I'd have to overstretch my thumb in order to hit anything except the triangle button, and if I held it where I could easily press the other buttons, I'd have to crunch my hand up, and that got pretty uncomfortable after about a minute, and even then I'd still have difficulty pressing the circle button. The only buttons I could comfortably press were the Move button, the trigger, and the triangle button. And by the way, using the nav controller didn't help, especially when playing a first-person shooter. Left thumb is kind of preoccupied with the analog stick, and when you take into account muscle memory, aka being used to the X and circle buttons being on the right side of the controller, yeah, good luck retraining yourself. Go ahead, try it. It's a lot harder than it sounds. And look at the start and select buttons on this thing. Look how flat they are. How the fuck am I supposed to quickly press these in the middle of a game? Seriously, look at what I have to do to press these. I practically need to use both hands just to press the select button. If you don't believe me and you think I'm making this up, watch how easily I can hit all the buttons on a regular controller and still work the analog sticks. See? There's no fancy science or optical illusions, it's just a practical, efficiently designed controller, and that's something the Move is not. And let's talk about what you need to use this thing. Yeah, there's the starter kit that has the Move controller, the camera, and a game, which is technically all you need, but let's be real here, you'll be able to play maybe a quarter of the library. You won't even be able to play all of the games on Move Sports Championship. If you really want to be able to use this thing, you need a nav controller and a charging station, unless you want to plug your controllers into the PS3 for a good 4 hours and charge them that way. And unless you're good at jerry-rigging and balancing shit, then you'll need a mount for the camera so you can properly put it on a TV. And if you want to play multiplayer or co-op, especially in light gun games like House of the Dead, or even if you want to play some single-player games like The Fight Lights Out, you need 2 Move controllers. Did you get all that? No? Okay, to get the absolute most out of the Move, you need everything you're seeing right here if you plan on playing by yourself, and everything you see right here plus another Move controller, and maybe another nav controller if you plan on playing multiplayer. And of course you got these fucking retarded add-ons like this, which I'm not going to bother picking up since there's 3 whole games on there that I'd end up playing, 2 of which I've already played and reviewed and don't care for. Anybody fired up to play some games yet? Provided the brightness on this goddamn thing doesn't blind us in the process? Yeah, there's no way to turn it off or even lower it. Fantastic, right? And by the way, did you know there are some games out there that need the Move? Neither did I. That caught me by surprise. I knew there were plenty of Kinect games out there that needed the Kinect, but I didn't think there were any out there that needed the Move. Well, either way you look at it, we don't have many good choices. I found this list on Wikipedia, and it's a decent-sized list, but most of the games are party, sports, dancing, or kids games. Those are all fine for 5 minutes of novelty, but for people who want to do some real gaming, that doesn't leave us with many options, and what we are left with, most of them either don't work well with the Move, or just aren't very good to begin with. Anybody fancy some Air Conflicts Vietnam or Cabela's Dangerous Hunts? Yeah, didn't think so. Okay, what about the ones I did play? Well, I tried 5 genres. I played a platformer, real-time strategy, sports, first-person shooter, and light gun, or on rails if you call it that, but I call it light gun. And for those of you wondering about Move Sports, it's a dumb minigame compilation, and yeah, it functioned just fine, but it wasn't very good, and I'm not counting it as a legitimate game. Anyways, almost every experience I had was terrible. This was mainly due to the bad design of the controller, as I talked about earlier, or that the games simply weren't designed to be played with a motion controller, as is the case with Infamous 2. That was a fucking disaster. And not the game itself. The game itself is fantastic. I beat it twice, loved every minute of it, but playing it with the Move is fucking impossible. With Killzone, it was really weird because the camera won't move unless you move the crosshair far away enough from the center of the screen. It reminded me a lot of Lost Planet before it was patched because that game behaved pretty much the same as this does. In any case, I never got used to it, even after hours of practicing. It always felt really awkward because I was so used to both the crosshair and camera moving at the same time. There are options you can play around with, but I never noticed a difference no matter what I did. Even still, I got okay at it, or at least I thought I did until I got to this area that I couldn't get by, and after dying more times than I can remember, I switched to a regular controller, breezed right through it, and that ended my adventures of playing Killzone with the Move. With Tiger Woods, though, it wasn't the controller, it was the camera. You see, when I was a teenager, my grandfather would take me to this place that had an amazing virtual setup, with driving ranges, real-life courses, you name it. And it was pretty obvious to me that you can't take a camera with a max resolution of 640 by 480 that also can't go widescreen and expect it to replicate this. When I went to take a shot, half my swing wouldn't be calculated because I would raise the controller too high and out of the field of view of the camera because it has such a shitty field of view. Even still, I didn't think it would be as hilariously inaccurate as it was, because even on shots where I didn't raise it out of the field of view, 90% of those shots I missed when I know for a fact in real life I wouldn't have. The most disappointing game, though, was Roos. It's a real-time strategy game, and the only RTS I know of that uses the Move, which is why I tried it. I watched Game Trailer's review back in the day, and I was like, oh, you can use the Move like a mouse pointer? That sounds awesome! And it is. The accuracy here is off the charts. I don't know what the developer did to make the pointer move so smoothly, because I didn't get this level of accuracy anywhere else, even in the best light gun games. The problem is, yet again, the controller. It was good at first. I was really enjoying it up until I had to multitask and fight wars on multiple fronts. By that point, the bad design of the controller kicked in, and I simply couldn't hit the buttons to order all my units around and build what I needed fast enough. That, and I think the camera had a mind of its own. You could manually move the camera around, but it would always go back to the default position every time some in-game cutscene or notification popped up, and the default setting wasn't very useful for looking over the battlefield. And that really sucks, because there was one hell of an opportunity here. You could take every RTS game in history, and if you programmed it as well as Roos and put it into a competently designed controller, it would be fucking amazing. Sony could have had a solid identity for the Move. They could have established it as the go-to controller for console RTS games, and maybe even bridged the gap between PC and console, at least as far as real-time strategy is concerned. They could have even continued this on PS4, since that supports the Move too. If they had done this, then maybe the Move wouldn't have been laughed off by everyone as a cheap Wii knockoff. But thanks to forces beyond its control, all of that was yet again crushed before it even got off the ground. The only good experience I had was with light gun games. Yeah, real shocker here. It's the only genre of gaming that the Move is good for. You only need to pull the trigger and occasionally hit either triangle or circle for a special attack like throwing a grenade or something. It's also the only genre where we have any decent games, but look on the bright side, we got plenty of choices. We got House of the Dead, Time Crisis, Resident Evil, Dead Space, all kinds of good stuff. We even got some old 90s games. So what's the final verdict? It's not very good, and I've already told you the reason at least half a dozen times by now. It's the design of the controller. And even if this wasn't a problem, let's say the design was good, even as good as the regular controller, there still wouldn't be any big reason to get this thing. Like I said earlier, what's the Move supposed to do? Give PS3 owners a taste of what it's like to play on the Wii? But the design is a big problem, and when you couple that with only one good genre of games, There's no reason to get the Move unless you're a die-hard fan of light gun, or want the novelty of playing with a motion controller for 5 minutes and don't have a Wii lying around. And the light gun games on PS3 are very good, but unless you want to move the crosshair with the fucking analog stick on a DualShock 3, which is as big a pain in the ass as it sounds, you're left with no other option if you want decent controls. This makes me suspect this was done on purpose, because did you know that you can take the Move controller and navigate the menus on PS3 without the camera being plugged in? Just look at what you're seeing right here. There's no camera, yet I'm going through the menus just fine, using it like a regular controller. Why couldn't we use the motion sensor in the DualShock 3 to move the crosshair in the light gun games? Plenty of regular PS3 games had motion control functions, and they didn't need the camera. Killzone 2 did this with the sniper rifle, and in Ridge Racer 6 you can set the options up so that you could steer the car with the motion sensor. I don't know how this tech works, so I'm probably missing most of the picture here, but I still gotta ask, hey Sony, what gives? Seriously kids, don't buy this thing. And now we move on to the Kinect, pun slightly intended. Right out of the gate, Kinect gets a few points over the Move, because you just need the camera to get started. And maybe an adapter, depending on which model of the 360 you got. There is a stand to mount it on a TV, and that's recommended for best results, but it works pretty well if you just put it on a table or something like that. Even still, if you have to get all three of these things, it's still fewer things than if you bought the complete Move package. And let's talk about the marketing too. It's much better than the Moves. It knows what it wants to be and who it's trying to sell to. You are the controller. Much more focused, much better directed, but make no mistake, it's a load of bullshit, because the Kinect does not work nearly as well as it's advertised. First things first, have a big area to move around in. You see on these commercials how big the living rooms are? Most people, when they went out and bought the Kinect, they forgot that most living rooms aren't this big, and if that's the case with you, you're going to run into a lot of problems when playing. It won't respond to your movements, or it'll keep disconnecting because it can't find you, it tells you to back up because you're too close, all sorts of fun little problems. And even if you have a very big and well-lit area, you'll be lucky if it works even half as good as the commercials, and I'm not exaggerating on that. In nearly all the games I played, it could barely follow any of my movements or commands, sometimes it wouldn't respond at all, or it would keep repeating the command long after I stopped. Like if I stopped moving forward, the character would keep moving forward, things wouldn't activate. Every problem you can think of with a motion sensing camera, I encountered them. There's only 2 games that I played where this didn't happen. Bottom line, the Kinect does not work well. I can't put it any more simply than that. And as for the games, remember when I said most of the Move games were party, sports, dancing, or kids games? Well, damn near every Kinect game falls under one of these categories, regardless if it needs the Kinect or not. And the ones that don't, they're either complete garbage, or what they add is a dumb gimmick at best. But you must be wondering, what about those 2 exceptions I mentioned earlier? The first one is Fruit Ninja. This worked pretty well for the most part. A slice got whiffed here and there. I hit a bomb a couple times and accidentally selected the wrong menu once because the game picked up me simply dropping my arm as a slice, but that was it. Besides that, it worked pretty darn good. I don't know what the developers did to make it work so well, but hats off to them. But guess what? This is a party game. It was good for about 10 minutes on my own, but then I realized, oh wait, I need other people to get the most out of this. The other exception is Halo Anniversary. It adds voice commands like switching your weapon, throwing a grenade, and scanning enemies and weapons to add to the database inside the game. Classic. Remastered. Change weapon. Flashlight. Flashlight. Grenade. Change weapon. Reload. Analyze. Stop analyzing. Look, it's neat. I'll give it that much. It was interesting being able to switch a gun or pause a game or throw a grenade just by calling it out. But within about 10 minutes, I found myself going back to the controller, and not just because it was quicker to push a button to throw a grenade or swap a gun than it is to call it out. The Kinect simply didn't have any practical use in gameplay. And as for the database, where you could scan enemies and weapons and vehicles in-game, what benefit does that give me? It doesn't. If I want to know more about any of this stuff, I'll go look it up on the internet. Halo has an entire fucking Wikipedia dedicated to it. It's a neat, but ultimately useless gimmick. When you're at the main dashboard, you have voice commands that you can use to navigate the menus, and you can also use your hands. The voice commands are okay, but using your hands doesn't work very well. More often than not, the Kinect couldn't follow my commands, such as it would go left instead of right, right instead of left, and so on. You also need to hold the cursor over whatever you want to go into for a few seconds, and you have to do this every time you want to go into a new menu or something. This gets pretty tiring after a couple minutes, and it's also very impractical. Unsurprisingly, I found myself going back to the controller very quickly. And that's about it. So what's the verdict? It should be more than obvious by now. The Kinect is a piece of junk. But that's not its own fault. The biggest problems I found were, number one, almost nobody had any drive or ambition to create something that wasn't a stupid party or kids game. Rise of Nightmares and Steel Battalion Heavy Armor were the only exceptions I could find. Especially Rise of Nightmares, this game looked fucking awesome. It's a first-person survival horror game with plenty of combat, lots of spooky stuff. It looks great until I started playing, and that's where I ran into the second problem. The technology just wasn't there yet. I know any smartphone today can do facial recognition like it's nothing, and things like Snapchat and Instagram can do all this fancy shit real easy, but the Kinect was the first major attempt to tap into this type of market. I know it wasn't an original idea, there was the iToy and the Wii, but I'm talking like motion-sensing stereoscopic 3D facial recognition stuff. Like this. This was the first major mainstream attempt to do this, so obviously the tech wasn't going to be great. Then again, I could be wrong. Maybe the tech was there, and the only problem was that no one wanted to put any effort into making these games. You know, now that I think about it, that's probably the reason why the Kinect is such a fail, if the games I played are anything to indicate. Anyways, which one is better? Well, for the 5 whole people that for some reason legitimately give a damn, the Move. Hands down. The Move curb stomps the Kinect into the ground and pisses on the remains. Sure, it's only got 5 good games, but the Kinect only has 1. Unless you don't count party games, then it has none. But unless you're a die-hard fan of light gun games, there's no reason to buy either of these. They're both a complete waste of money. You'd get more value out of buying a fucking Vita. Hell, even the fucking Vita TV thing, that's a better buy, even though half the Vita games don't work on it. At least you can finally play all your favorite PSP games on a big screen. And have decent controls, too. You know, now that I think about it, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Huh. Might have to consider getting that. Could make a damn good review in the future. Wait a minute. Hey, is the mic still on?